A big thank you to Ziva for sponsoring this video. I built this entire game in one sitting, or did I? And amazingly, I wrote almost no code. There was no complex setup, no long tutorials, just Godot 4.6 and Ziva doing most of the heavy lifting. So how did I do it? Well, it started with just a few simple prompts and turned into a full playable space shooter. In this video, I'll show you the exact process from generating the idea to creating the game design document to building and polishing everything, and by the end, even publishing it on itch.io. And not to worry, I won't be trying to break down any complicated code or get into all the boring stuff. But you know what? That does not mean skipping the important steps that makes this workflow so great. You'll see what works, what breaks, and how to actually use the Ziva AI assistant to speed up your workflow in Godot. Oh, and one other thing, how much did this all cost? We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. I honestly can't tell you which is faster to install, Ziva or Godot. So let's run through both so you can decide. First, head over to godot.org and grab the latest version of Godot. Then jump over to ziva.sh, download the Ziva plugin, and create a free account, or pick one of their affordable plans. I went with the manual install. With the Ziva plugin downloaded, create a new project in Godot, then extract the plugin into the root directory inside the system folder. Once that's done, the Ziva add-on folder should show up automatically. Back in Godot, you'll now see a Ziva tab. To start using it, just log in, and that's pretty much it. Alright. Now that we've got Godot and the Ziva plugin set up, let's actually start building. For this project, we're going to start off with the Gemini 3.1 Pro model, but that may change later. If you want a more detailed video on how to set up Ziva, consider watching this video when you're done here. The link will be in the description. Now, the most important part of any AI-assisted project is the prompt. And this is where Ziva's best practices come into play. When creating your prompts, it's very important to follow these best practices. 1. Plan your conversations. 2. Be specific and concise. 3. Batch requests. 4. Review your prompts. 5. Pick the right model. 6. Keep scripts small. And 7. Start fresh chats for new topics. I won't go into the details of each of these because I really don't want to stretch out this video. So please feel free to check out Ziva's site if you want a more in-depth explanation. To build this game, we will go through the following call to action plan I like to call Spark. S-P-A-R-K. S is for Spark. This is where you develop your core idea, the concept that will drive your game. P is for plan. Here you create a clear game design document, or GDD, to define mechanics, goals, and most importantly, scope. A is for assemble. This is the actual development phase. This is where you bring your game to life through coding, art, and gameplay mechanics. R is for refine. And in my opinion, this is the most fun part. In this stage, you playtest, iterate, and polish the experience to make it as smooth and enjoyable as possible. And K is for kickoff. Finally, you get to publish your completed game demo, sharing it online with others on platforms like itch.io. I really wanted to keep things organized, so I thought that creating the Spark framework would keep the process structured while still leaving room for my creativity and the iteration process. Alright, let's start with the first step. But first, a quick tip before we jump in. Ziva actually mentions this in their Did You Know hints on the start page of a new chat. You can turn off approval, making the agent run autonomously by toggling the option in the Ziva settings. All this does is avoids you having to click approve every time Ziva needs to make a change. For this game, I've chosen to create a space shooter similar to the project I developed for the Ziva Game Jam. The themes for that jam were One More Turn, Chain Reaction, and Momentum. So the next step is to use Ziva to generate some ideas based on those concepts. One important tip when prompting: aim to be as clear and specific as possible, while keeping your wording concise. You want enough detail to guide the output, but not so much that the prompt becomes overwhelming. Here's the exact prompt I used. Can you give me 3 ideas for a vertical top-down arcade space shooter game where enemies spawn in on the top of the screen and the player controls a spaceship that has 8 directional movement? Suggest 3 enemy types and 3 power-ups for each player. Each example must follow one of the 3 themes provided: one more turn, chain reaction, and momentum, and suggest names for each of the games. I got 3 really great ideas, but the one that really stood out to me was, funny enough, number 1. Ziva suggested Chronos Sector for the name, but I later changed that. This idea fit into the one more turn loop with a wave system. Enemies spawn in short assault phases, and between each phase, there's a quick pause where the player picks a perk, creating that addictive just one more wave feel. There would be 3 enemy types: the Phase Shifter, the Chrono Mine, and the Echo Stalker. And the power-ups would be: first, a time rewind system; second, Stasis Bolt that adds a 10% chance for shots to freeze enemies for 2 seconds; and third, Paradox Dive, a big fire rate boost, but you take double damage for 10 seconds. Now, this was way more than I expected, and I would have to cut some of it because I knew it was quite a lot to get done in just one sitting, even with Ziva's help. I decided to have Ziva generate a full game design document. Why? Because I want to see how Ziva plans to build the game. That way I can step in, manage the process, and catch where things might start going off track. So I actually know how to fix this if it eventually happens. Now, I know you could do something similar with ChatGPT for free, but this feels way better since everything lives inside the project. All your contexts, ideas, and outputs are in one place, inside the engine, which makes the workflow feel a lot smoother. Alright, let's go ahead and ask for the GDD, making sure to follow the best practices. Number 7, start fresh chats for new topics. So now let's write the prompt for creating the GDD. Okay, I know it sounds a bit redundant, but I'm actually doing this on purpose. I want to be certain that I have a clear plan going in before I actually start building the game. So here's the prompt I use. Can you write a prompt to create a high-level game design document for the following game idea, covering everything from art to game mechanics to sound? I just want the prompt, not the actual GDD. And then I pasted in the idea that Ziva generated previously. But here's a question for you. Do you think I really needed this step? Or could I just jump straight into generating the GDD? I'm curious. What do you think? Alright, so now that we've got the GDD and actually read through it, and that step is really important, right? Let's move on to the development. I started by trying to create some placeholder art. So I opened a new chat and prompted for player art using Gemini 3.1 Pro. At first I tried going for vector art, but ran into the first limitation. At the time of making this video, the tool is specifically built for pixel art capped at 64 by 64 resolution. So no true high-res scalable vector graphics here. With that in mind, I pivoted and headed over to lowspec.com, picked out a color palette, and used that to create some placeholder art that was closest to the vision I had in mind. With that out of the way, I moved on to some basic project setup. I could have let Ziva handle it, but I preferred doing this part myself. So I set the viewport to 540 by 960 and switched the stretch mode to canvas items. Next up was the player controller and the first ability, time rewind. I did a bit of initial setup, wrote my prompt, and let Ziva do its thing. You can pause the video here if you want to read the exact prompt I use. After that, I let Ziva build out the player's shooting system. I started by building a basic shot and then asked Ziva to use scene inheritance to create 4 variations of this shot. Since time was tight, I made a design call. Instead of traditional power-ups, the player shot would scale based on movement. So the longer the player keeps moving, the stronger the shots would get, going from single shots to wider spread shots. If the player stopped moving for a short time, the shot power gets reset back to default. I wrote the prompt, ran it, and Ziva nailed it on the first try. Then I moved on to the enemies. Ziva created the first two enemies easily, the phase shifter and then the echo chaser. Now, because this part went really smoothly, I decided to level things up a bit and turn the last enemy, the chrono mine, into a boss. And this is where having the GDD really paid off. I just copied the enemy description into a new chat, tweaked it a bit, and Ziva quickly turned it into a full boss design. The boss starts at the top of the screen, slowly moves down to the center, and attacks using a mix of mechanics. Phase shifter style shots from the front, and the echo chaser type attacks coming from the left and right sides. After that, I worked on the player's health system and an enemy spawner. Once those were in, I did a bunch of playtesting, tuning things like player speed, enemy speed, fire rates, and the players' and enemies' health to get the game feeling balanced. With that done, it was time to build out the actual game loop. I made some placeholder art and then asked Ziva to hook everything up using a game manager script for the core logic and a button manager for handling input. The loop was pretty simple. The game starts paused with a start card. Press enter and the game begins. Enemies start spawning in from the top. After the first wave completes, you're given a choice between 3 out of 4 random perk cards. If you don't pick one, the highlighted card gets auto-selected and the cycle repeats. When the player dies, the game over card shows up. Press enter again and the main scene gets reloaded. But there was still a lot to do with the UI. I wanted to have UI for the player health and the time rewind ability, and possibly a scoring system and a wave counter. And to be completely honest, Ziva handled that beautifully. And I'm not just saying that because this is a sponsored video. I just needed to be very deliberate and concise with the prompts. And I referenced the GDD that Ziva created to keep scope creep in check. Once that was done, I moved on to the perk system. At the end of each wave, the player is shown 3 out of 4 cards. R increases how long the player can stay still before the shot phase resets. S gives a small permanent boost to player speed. H increases max health and heals the player a bit. And J, the wild card, resets one random perk back to its default value. Implementing this was actually pretty smooth. All I did was set up the R card using an HBox container and a texture button for the card. And then I asked Ziva to create the systems one by one using this example scene. And Ziva just used the button manager to handle the perk logic and apply the effects based on which card was selected. Let's take a closer look at how Ziva handled the speed perk. Remember, I asked Ziva to use beginner-friendly code. Now I actually wired up the signals to the button manager script manually. And for the press signals on the speed button, I had Ziva handle the code. What Ziva did was pretty straightforward. First, the script checks if the button is visible, and then it looks for the player and assigns a player variable. If the player exists and has a speed variable, it adds the speed bonus and prints out a quick message to the console showing what happened. After that, it grabs the game manager and calls the function to advance to the next phase. From there, I had Ziva set up the rest of the perks in a similar way. Ziva usually took between 1 and 3 minutes to create the systems. So because this was done so fast, I made sure to follow along step by step with the summaries and explanations so I could actually understand what was happening each step of the way. Then it was time to set up the sounds. I went a bit old school with this, taking the design principle from a Brackeys tutorial on sound management in Unity from way back in the day. I used this design principle to set up a sound manager, added a level music node using an audio stream player, and dropped in the music through the inspector. In the ready function, I just called a play level music function, and that handled it. After that, I asked Ziva to follow the same pattern for the rest of the game sounds. And for the most part, it handled everything pretty smoothly. With one small issue, I was accessing the sound manager using a unique name from the level scene, which works fine, but only for nodes that live in the same scene. This became a problem for things like the player shot, since that lives in a different scene, and the sound manager was not an autoload. So Ziva basically ignored my approach there and explained that it needed to access the sound manager in a different way, which to be fair makes perfect sense. But interestingly enough, even for UI sounds that were in the same scene, Ziva didn't stick to using the unique name there either. At that point, I could either go back to making everything consistent or just leave it as it is. What do you think? Clean up for consistency or move on? Honestly, this is where proper game architecture really starts to matter. The boss battle kicks in after you survive a set number of waves. The default value is 5. The Chronomine boss spawns in at the top and starts patrolling up and down, moving between the top and middle of the screen. As soon as the boss appears, a custom health bar shows up. Its start value is 5000 HP. It smoothly updates using a shader for the health bar as the boss takes damage. Once the boss is defeated, the bar hides automatically. I got the shader from GodotShaders.com, and to my surprise, Ziva was able to add features to the shaders that I requested. Let me explain. The original shader did not have the adjustment for line thickness that I needed to make the lines in the health bar more visible. But Ziva was able to modify the shader code to include this feature with a normal language prompt. Yet another way that Ziva dramatically changes the efficiency of your workflow. With that done, it was time for refine and polish. And honestly, for me, this was the most fun part, because this is where the game really starts to come alive. I upgraded the visuals and added some juice. For the art, I used ChatGPT to generate a more polished proof of concept art style. Then came the real work, playtesting, and really a lot of playtesting. This is the part that every game dev needs to pay attention to. This is where you refactor, fix bugs, tweak gameplay, cut what doesn't work, and add what's missing. Now, just because I had Ziva helping doesn't mean I was blindly prompting and letting Ziva do everything. Anytime that I asked for something that I didn't fully understand, I made sure to read through the code, check the explanations, and even ask follow-up questions before making changes. That made a huge difference, especially since I was not using version control, which is really risky, I know. Now, I know what you might be thinking. What about hallucinations? How do you tell what's actually correct? Well, what I did was keep things grounded. I asked Ziva to stick to beginner level code, so if anything looked off, I could quickly verify it against the Godot docs. I also gave examples of what I wanted and asked for improvements along the way. The goal here isn't to blindly follow Ziva. It's to guide it and use it as a way to learn new concepts as you build. Using that approach, I was able to add things like camera shake, particle effects, pseudo animations, UI, and even modify shaders from GodotShader.com. Remember, Ziva even helped modify shader code to fit what I needed by building some really clean, dynamic health bars. Honestly, that part was really impressive. So now that this is all done, let's do our first build. We go to project, and since this is the first project I'm making with Godot 4.6.2, I will need to download a preset. So we click Add and choose Web since we're uploading the game to itch.io. Now just ignore all that red that Godot is screaming at us. Then click Manage Export Templates and download and install. Once that's done, click Export Project and choose a destination folder. I will create a builds folder and in there, a folder with the game name and 00 as the number. Then I give it the name index because itch.io requires that the build be called index. Then save and then click Export Project and uncheck Export with Debug and click Save again. Now, this window that popped up here, we can ignore. It's regarding Ziva and says that Ziva will be ignored in the final build. It means that the export will still finish. This warning is completely harmless and you can safely ignore it. Then we click OK and the build is complete. And we simply zip up the folder and we're ready to go. Which takes us to Kickoff, publishing your game on itch.io. Itch.io is an online platform where creators can upload, share, and sell games along with assets and other digital projects. It's widely used in the indie scene because it's open, flexible, and very creator-friendly. For beginners, itch.io removes a lot of the usual barriers. You can upload your game for free, set your own price, even pay what you want, and publish instantly without needing approval. That means you can go from building your first game to having real players try it in minutes. It's also a powerful learning platform. Itch.io hosts tons of game jams, short challenges where you create small games around a team. These are perfect for practicing skills, finishing projects, and building a quick portfolio. Another big advantage is the community. Players on itch.io are more open to experimental or rough around the edges games, so beginners can get honest feedback without the pressure of being perfect. In short, itch.io is a low-pressure launchpad, easy to use, supportive, and built for learning by doing. But itch.io is definitely not a perfect platform. Here are 5 really useful tips to consider before using itch.io. 1. Assuming publishing equals players. Uploading a game doesn't guarantee visibility. Most traffic comes from your own promotion, so low plays at the start are normal. 2. Starting too big. Trying to release a dream game early often leads to burnout or unfinished projects. Smaller, complete games are far more valuable. 3. Neglecting presentation. First impressions matter. A clean page, strong thumbnail, and clear description makes a huge difference in getting clicks. 4. Skipping proper testing. Broken builds are a common mistake. Always test your upload version like a player before publishing. And 5. Using game jams without focus. Game jams are great, but only if you finish. Prioritize completion and learning over joining as many as possible. Now, I won't go into the details of setting up an itch.io account because it's pretty self-explanatory. Once that's done, we jump over to the itch.io dashboard and create a new project. Give it a name. I went with Kinetic Drive Ziva Demo. For the cover image, I just used the game start screen for now. Itch does recommend specific sizes, but you can always swap in the proper screenshots later. For the project type, choose HTML. Then I set it to no payments. After that, hit upload and select your build file. Sometimes you might run into an error here. Usually it's because of a dash in the file name that gets auto-generated. Just remove the dash and upload again, and it should work fine. Next, set the viewport dimensions to match your game's resolution. For the game description, honestly, besides you, who knows your game better than Ziva? So I wrote a quick prompt asking Ziva to generate an itch description with controls, a bit of a backstory, and a general overview. plus a note that the game was made using Ziva. Then I just copied it over and tweaked it a bit. After that, pick a genre, shooter, and add some tags like 2D, shoot 'em up, and space. Fill in the AI disclosure section, then make the project public, and uncheck disable downloads. Then click save and view page. If all went well, it would load your game for the first time, and all you need to do is click edit theme and transform the page from the default layout to something more custom. And don't forget to playtest your game to make sure the game works as intended. So how long did this actually take? Honestly, I thought I could pull this off in one sitting with Ziva, and I got really close, but not quite. The full game came together in about 2 days, working for about 5 hours at random times during the day, because my other real-life obligations did not allow me to sit for 10 hours straight. But then I also have to take into consideration the time it took to make this video. And the total cost for this project? Just over $6. To build it, I followed a simple system I like to call Spark. Remember, spark the idea, plan with a clear game design document, assemble the actual development process, refine and polish the experience, and kick off and publish on itch.io. That workflow is what made it possible to go from idea to playable game in a very reasonable amount of time, together with what I consider to be the best Godot AI assistant out there right now, Ziva. A big shout out to G over on the Ziva Discord for being one of the first to playtest my game and leaving such awesome feedback. Not to worry, G, I managed to get those death explosions, as you call them, fixed. And a big shout out to the entire Ziva team for making such an awesome product. If this video made you stop and think about how you're learning Godot and not just what you're building, then you're exactly who this channel is for. I make videos for developers who want to understand their code and have the discussions that tackle the difficult topics. So if that sounds like you, hit subscribe. You'll feel right at home here. And before you head out, I've got a couple quick questions for you. I'm curious, what would you build if you had Ziva, one sitting, and almost no code? And what kind of game should I try next? Until next time, happy coding, keep experimenting, and I'll see you in the comments. This has been Diraku Games.